So I found that the actual discussion about DNA can be a little daunting for most folks. So in all honesty, I try to keep that part to a minimum. But I will show a few slides about DNA because I think it's important to understand what kind of DNA there is, what kind of DNA tests there are, where the DNA comes from, because I think that that helps us decide which kind of tests to order and helps us focus our genealogy research. Okay, so everything is up and running. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Ginger Smith, like you said, and I'm very happy to be here. And so the first thing I'm going to talk about is the DNA part. Okay, so you really need to know, why do I need to use DNA for my genealogy testing? And there are several reasons for that. Basically, you want to fill in gaps in your family tree. That's a very big reason, very good reason, and it can be easily satisfied with DNA testing. You want to break down a brick wall. A lot of people come to me and they say, I have a brick wall, I'd like to get past it. DNA testing is a very good tool to use for that. You want to prove your European ancestry. So you think that you came from Wales or you came from England or Scotland. You may have a person in mind that you think that you descend from. So you can use DNA testing to either prove or disprove that theory. And similarly, you want to prove or disprove a lineage. Okay, this is the nitty-gritty part. This is the actual DNA. This is the only slide I'm going to show on DNA.
Yes.
This is the cell. And that center part there, that big blob there in the middle, that's the nucleus. And the nucleus contains the Y DNA. And the nucleus also contains the autosomal DNA. The autosomal DNA is your 22 pairs of chromosomes and your sex chromosomes. And then those little red things, there we go. The little red things, those are the mitochondria. That's where your mitochondrial DNA is packaged. Okay, so those are actually separate kinds of DNA, and they serve different functions. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the Y DNA. The Y DNA is only in males. And if someone were to ask you where you got your Y DNA from, you would say, I got it from my father, he got it from his father, and he got it from his father, and so on. Now that DNA is inherited from father to son, relatively unchanged. So this person down here at the bottom has the same DNA as his paternal grandfather and his paternal great-grandfather. Okay? Unless something happened, unless a genetic mutation happened, they should have the same exact DNA. Mitochondrial DNA. Now, both males and females can have this, but only females can carry it on to the next generation. Only females can pass it on. Females can pass it on to their sons or their daughters. So if you were to ask either male or female where they got their mitochondrial DNA from, they would say they got it from their their mother, and they got it from their grandmother and their great-grandmother, and so on. Same thing applies here for the mitochondrial DNA. It gets passed on from the mother to the child, relatively unchanged. In fact, the mitochondrial DNA changes less rapidly than the Y DNA. Now, the significance of that is you can look at your deep ancestry. So you can go back thousands and thousands and thousands of years and learn about your Y DNA and learn about your mitochondrial DNA. That's the nice thing about these two kinds of testing. That's different from autosomal DNA. Autosomal DNA, you're going to look at both sides of your family. You're going to look at the males, and you're going to look at the females. And you're going to look at their males and their females, going all the way back. keep forgetting to point it toward the screen. Okay. So the thing about the autosomal DNA is that it does not get passed on to each generation intact. It gets mixed up. It gets recombined. So you get little bits and pieces from each of your ancestors passed down through the generations. So this male at the bottom, he ends up getting a little bit of the red pieces from his paternal ancestors and a little bit of the blue pieces from his maternal ancestors. And this is what you end up with. You end up with chromosomes with a little bit of red and a little bit of blue from both your maternal ancestors and your paternal ancestors. So this is a good thing because it actually will help you with this recent ancestry. So it gives you information about your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your second great-grandparents, and so forth on both sides of your family. The limitation is that this test and the DNA is limited to about 5 generations back. So anything beyond 5 generations probably will not be picked up by autosomal DNA. So remember, this is recent ancestry. Mitochondrial and Y-DNA is more ancient ancestry.
I got a question. The autosomal, can that be done for females also, or
Yes.
just males?
Yes, this is females and males.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. And this is the one that will tell you who your cousins are, your first cousins, second cousins. Also give you sibling relationships, aunts and uncles, and so forth. So when do you use the Y-DNA testing? Y-DNA testing is, number one, especially important for adoptees who don't know their birth parents' names. So the Y-DNA test will tell them, hopefully, the surname of their birth father. If you are researching and you have your paper trail and your genealogy tree and you have 2 men with the same name, one's in Massachusetts, one's in Georgia, 2 different time periods, you want to find out, is the one in Georgia the same one that used to live in Massachusetts? You can use Y-DNA to test some descendants from those 2 men. Surname origins, that goes back to the ancient ancestry. Immigrant ancestor confirmation, that's again, you're trying to see if you can prove that you descend from a certain person in the UK or in Scotland, and so forth. Mitochondrial DNA testing. This is a little bit more trickier. This is one of those tests that you only want to take if you have a specific goal in mind. You have a hypothesis and you want to prove it, okay? Native American ancestry, you can usually pick that up with your mitochondrial DNA, but again, that only applies if the Native American ancestry is from your mother's 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 side. Okay, you can't use mitochondrial testing if the Native American ancestry is on your father's side. It won't work. Bullet point number 3 is wife number 1 or wife number 2 my ancestor? Okay, you can use mitochondrial testing for this, but you kind of have to have a hypothesis in mind. You kind of have to know the 2 names of those 2 women, and then try to prove which one is the actual wife, which one is your ancestor. And again, deep ancestral origins. So like I mentioned, unlike Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA, autosomal DNA is for recent ancestry. Okay? It does get changed from generation to generation, and you and your siblings will not all get the same bits and pieces of DNA. So what happens is you may have a match to a cousin, but your brother may not be a match to that same cousin because you all got different pieces of DNA from your parents. And that cousin got different pieces of DNA from their parents. So that's one of the things you have to think about with that. It is.
What if it's twins?
Twins do not have the same DNA. No, they do not. You can consider twins to be siblings, full siblings.
Even if they're identical twins?
Correct. Chances are they do not have the same exact DNA. Remember there's the three types of DNA that I'm talking about? There's lots of other DNA that we don't touch. all the health-related DNA, the DNA that makes your eyes blue, the DNA that makes your hair blonde, we don't touch that at all, right? Because that's private, right? So those are the things that identify between the identical twins. Yes?
That raises the question, isn't all this information private? And when you go to these different testing facilities, is there some sort of security that they tell you that they aren't going to tell anybody else? I'm not a felon, I've not committed any crimes, so I'm not worried about them finding me because of the DNA test. But how secure is that information? I mean, it's still your information. No one else should have access to it.
If you've committed a crime, I highly recommend that you don't submit your DNA to anybody.
Yeah, really.
Of course.
I mean, yes, they do everything possible to keep your information private, but you guys are all good researchers. You know how hard you try to find information about people, whether they're living or they're deceased. You know, other people can do the same thing, and you can. There are ways that you can find out maybe if a test belongs to a certain person, but that's pretty much the extent that you can go to. I mean, I can't find out what genetic disease you are predisposed to based on your DNA results from these testing
Could
companies.
law authorities go to one of the testing companies if they knew a person had been tested there, get a warrant?
It's very difficult. They do not use this kind of testing for identification of felons. They use the CODIS markers, which is different.
And if I may say, one has to be careful when they try to make DNA testing so private, because I remember when I was in college and we did the chronological tree, and we were trying to find out if these two people can get married, and we would check the tree to ensure that they are not related.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noted that they do not do that anymore, which is very dangerous, and it should be done.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as private and shouldn't always be private, because it results in major damage down the road.
Yeah, and it's like everything else with the information technology and changes. You just have to be aware of what's going on. You have to be aware of what the possibilities are and keep up with that and make sure that you keep in contact with the testing companies and ask these kinds of questions. But I mean, my advice is if you have committed a crime or you have family who are running from the law, I wouldn't submit your DNA, but technically law enforcement is not allowed to get your DNA. I mean, they can get a court order and force the companies to give them something, but that DNA is not useful to them. I can tell you that for sure. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. Autosomal testing will also give you an ethnicity profile. This is just predictions, and it's based on the reference population that they use. So all three testing companies have different reference populations that they use. So you may get an ethnicity prediction from one company that's a little bit different from another company. So this is not really set in stone. It's just kind of a fun little tool that you can use. Generally, it's pretty close. And they do go down into more specific areas. Like here you see Iberian Peninsula and Scandinavian and a little bit of African. This is mine, by the way. So you can see how that works.
Excuse me, I did have a question. Okay, with regard to this autosomal DNA, if a female person submits that and has that this profile done, will that help to determine a little bit of the paternal side for her?
Yes.
This autosomal, because of course the woman can't do the Y DNA,
Correct,
right?
yeah.
So does this one help give a little of that male side for the female?
Yes, this will give both your male and your female side, your mother's and your father's side.
And a woman can submit this?
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah,
Good.
either males or females can
Okay.
take this test. This is probably the most popular test right now.
Well, will the breakdown, when they do the ethnicity profile, will that break down with this result of this autosomal, will they be able to sort of say, okay, this maybe came from the mother's side, this came from the father's side, or no?
Some companies
Ah.
will do that, yeah. So, yes,
You were kind enough to speak to me on the phone the other day.
yes,
I'm Charlie
Mr.
Mason from
Mason.
Raleigh, yes. And one of the things that you briefly explained to me was, I call it the database, you used another word just a moment ago,
reference population.
reference population. Where is that information other than talking to somebody like you? In other words, you told me, since I was looking to see if my heritage was, I had ancestors from Scotland, the family tree would probably be the best thing for me. But you told me that. How do we find out which one, did they tell you what their database is?
No, no, they don't make that information
So it
public.
has to be, you have to ask somebody like yourself who's knowledgeable about this.
Yeah, I mean, you can go on the ISOG website, and that's on your handout. It's isogg.org. And they keep up with that kind of stuff, and they'll probably give you a list of which one to check. So, yes.
It's kind of fun to go on GenMatch, and they have a number of different reference populations, like Eurogenes.
Yes.
And those, and you can
Yeah.
get different, since the statistics are different for each group, you can see how it changes when you go from one type to the other, because
Yeah.
all this is not set in stone.
Yeah, one more question, and then I'll move on.
Just a quick comment, what I've done, if you're willing to be public on Ancestry.com, then, and other people are also willing to be public, then that gives you an opportunity to sort of mingle with people, because I've run into people that would be a second cousin or whatever, or one was the first. But that's still with my permission to be public, because I didn't care.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So this is just a brief overview of the three companies that you can test with, and this is also in your handout. And I'm just gonna move through this pretty quickly because I do wanna get everything in. And when you do pick a testing company, these are some of the things to consider. How easy is it to take the sample, whether it's a spit test or is it a cheek swab? Some people have trouble doing the spit test, so they prefer the cheek swab. Also, can you view their family trees? Ancestry is the best for that if you like to be able to go in and view people's family trees. And data analysis. So those are some of the things to consider. So the next thing I'm going to talk about, so that's all I'm going to say about the DNA part, okay? Because you can do a whole class about DNA and so forth. I'm just going to show you a little bit of a practical example of how DNA is used to prove or disprove a hypothesis, and talk about the research question. So before you consider taking a DNA test, I highly recommend that you kind of think about what your research question is, what your focus is, and write that down, because that's going to help you choose what kind of test to take, and it's going to help you understand your matches, and it's going to help you know what to do with your matches once you get them, with your DNA results once you get them. So I'm going to give you an overview of a case study. The original question that I came up with was, who were the parents of Robert King? Okay. Now that's probably a good question that a lot of people have. They want to know who someone's parents were. But that's a little broad, right? I don't have any suggestions for who they may be or where they may have come from. So you want to narrow that focus. You want to narrow that question down into a more specific question. So my question then became, was the Robert King who married Tabitha House the son of Wilsie King? Okay, so I've identified my Robert King. I've identified which one he is. He is the one that married Tabitha House. And then I've identified a possible father for him. So I want to be able to provide evidence that Wilsie King was his father. So I'm going to do that, hopefully. So we're going to start with what you know, okay? So my Robert King, as I mentioned, he was the guy that was married to Tabitha House. And they were married July 28, 1870 in Howell County, Missouri. They had 2 children. One was named Dora and one was named William Fletcher. And then Robert King died in 1876. So they were only married for about 6 years. He was buried in Wilderness Cemetery in Wilderness, Oregon County, Missouri. And then Tabitha House remarried to a man named Samuel Watson in 1879. So this is everything that I know about my Robert King.
I would have to go.
So this is a marriage certificate of Robert King to Tabitha House. It's a little unreadable. Here's the transcription. Okay. This is to certify that the rites of matrimony were solemnized by the minister of the gospel between Robert King of Oregon County and Tabitha House of Howell County, Missouri. 28th day of July, 1870. Now this is the marriage certificate of Tabitha King to Samuel Watson, 1879. This is the transcription. This happened in Oregon County, Missouri. Oregon County, Missouri and Howell County, Missouri are right next to each other. They're also right on top of Arkansas. So you have Missouri, southern Missouri, and then you also have Arkansas. Here we have Samuel Watson being enumerated on the 1880 Oregon County, Missouri census. He's with his wife, Becca Watson, that's short for Tabitha, and their 2 children, William and Dora. Unfortunately, they're listed as Watsons, even though they're really Kings. This is the only time that they're listed as Watsons. Any other record, they're listed as Kings. Now, I'm just showing you these records to kind of tie in the correlation between Robert King and Tabitha House, and then Samuel Watson as well. Now, this is a special little census. It's the 1890 Civil War Veterans Schedule. So this was taken with all the wives